Hi, and welcome to People First, a Lotus People podcast. In a world that's constantly evolving, this podcast exists to inspire people centric leaders to navigate through these ever changing times. We're excited to share stories, build a community, and learn from one another. We're your hosts, Sophie Thomas and Sinead Connolly, and we run award winning recruitment agency, Lotus People. Having been in the recruitment industry for 12 plus years, we've had the privilege of engaging with some incredible organisations and leaders. And we didn't want to keep these insights to ourselves. So we're bringing you inside some of these discussions, focusing on the most prevalent topics in the market right now. Join us as we dive deep into the heart of leadership, exploring the challenges and opportunities shaping today's workplace. You can expect candid conversations, practical advice, and inspiring stories from leaders who are making a real difference. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to the People First community.
And we are officially live. Ria, welcome to the podcast. It is honestly lovely to have you here. We've literally been chatting for about 15 minutes before we even hit record. So I know that there's going to be a lot of goodness that comes out of this, and I am very, very excited. So over to you, Soph, for an official intro.
Ria, I am super excited to have you here with us today. Obviously, look, you're absolutely incredible human being and someone I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know over the kind of last 6 to 8 months. You've got an extremely unique skill set, but also this infectious energy. I know that you have a track record in turnaround, transformation, and strategy, and you've driven a lot of excellence in very diverse and regulated industries. I think you also have been whilst you've got a really natural and dynamic approach to kind of fostering high performing cultures and acting as that kind of catalyst for organization wide innovation and success. I feel like we could take this conversation in so many different directions with you having experience across kind of HR, organizational psychology, exec leadership, and then also that kind of change and project management side. And even more recently, you've obviously moved into that kind of CPO role, which didn't come through that traditional HR career move. Look, the point of this podcast was to really gain insights from amazing people like yourself and add value to our audience. So with all of this said, and to kick things off, could you share a brief overview of your experience and how you developed this kind of passion for transformation and leadership?
Yeah, for sure. And look, thank you both for having me. I really appreciate it. And so if you nailed that intro, I might need you kind of going forward for any future roles, if you don't mind. But yeah, look, I've had 20 years of global experience. I've had lots of really interesting opportunities and been given and provided lots of interesting opportunities across the world, led thousands of people globally and been very fortunate to do so. I've been in retail, collections, community justice, telco, financial services, and I sort of developed this opportunity and passion for strategy and transformation with a real strong kind of continuous improvement lens on it. Almost immediately when I started in business, I always wanted to see what we could do differently and better, and how can we be stronger, faster, and I just absolutely love doing that. I've always led multidisciplinary teams as well, so I've really had the opportunity to lean into different parts of business where some people don't necessarily get that opportunity. You can tell from my accent, I'm a long way from home. I'm a Welsh girl, born and bred, but I've been away from the UK now 17 years, which just still blows my mind really that we've been away that long. But it's given me the opportunity to travel and be around the world. I moved to Australia in 2017 for what was only supposed to be a contract for a year, but the rest is history as we are in 2024. And leading those colleagues through kind of multi-billion-dollar contracts. And I've been super fortunate to work with some of the best brands in the world and being given those opportunities by people that have trusted and seen something in me along the way, which I'm sort of obviously forever grateful. My other role in life outside of recently being the Chief People and Culture Officer at Gallagher Bassett, who are a global third-party claims administrator, is mum to my 10-year-old, who's Imogen, who obviously keeps me honest throughout my career. And then more recently, just working with companies who are super innovative, being really kind of brave and bold in a really interesting economic climate. I'm really fortunate to work along super smart people and leaders along the way.
Amazing. That is a very, very good synopsis from each of you. And the 17 years, Ria, honestly, when you said that, it seems like so many years. I've been here 14, and I just can't even begin to articulate how fast it goes. Blink of an eye, like genuinely can't get over it.
That's phenomenal. And I think about all the things I've been fortunate enough to cram into those years, and just, yeah, it's unreal, really. Have been very privileged.
No, I can completely relate to that. And look, I think from everything you've mentioned, I mean, obviously your experience is so broad, and I think you'll bring such a unique perspective to this conversation around leadership, because you have had such different exposure outside of purely P&C. And I think you mentioned as well, it's a tricky time. It's a tricky time to be in business. There's so much going on in relation to everything from the sort of tech, AI world and everything that's happening there, and that revolution. And then obviously on the sort of economic side of things, it's been a wild sort of few years, and obviously since the pandemic as well. So I think the role of a leader has never been more important, but it's also probably evolved quite a lot. From your experience, what do you think makes a strong people leader?
You know, I was thinking about this just recently. I mean, I've been very fortunate to work in organisations with phenomenal leaders that have seen something in me or taken a chance on a colleague that's fundamentally changed their career. And you know, we sort of can buzzwords, you know, unleashing potential of people and all of those things, but actually what it comes down to is really a few things. Is someone who genuinely cares about their team as individuals and as a collective, and how they sort of fit into the broader business, and understands how they impact the business at an outcomes level and those individuals, so that they can really leverage their strengths. Also someone that really kind of shows up and puts a mirror in front of people. And I invariably will talk about mirrors, I suspect, during this conversation. It's a favourite topic of mine. But to put a mirror up to somebody to say, this is where you do really well, and this is something that you have a great opportunity to learn and grow with, and to create an environment where someone feels really safe to be able to step into something new or different. And there's nothing wrong with staying where someone wants to be and where they are. There's nothing wrong with that. But if someone wants to grow, to have a leader who takes a coaching position for them, to be able to help drive them forward is critical. I always try and start a meeting that doesn't talk necessarily about our team. You know, it's about being able to talk about the business as a whole, whether that's the financials, whether or not that's the challenges, whether that's the opportunity, whether it's merger and acquisition, whatever it might be. But to help people to connect to something that is just bigger than we are as individuals. You know, it really does go to the heart of it's not I, but we. And having really honest and open communication with those colleagues along the way. When it's good, share it. When it's not good, share it. I see the best coming out of people when something is not good and we're really stuck and we're in trouble. That is when I see people rally. And if you have an environment where people have got strong trust, open communication, you're approachable, transparent, that's when people will come and really connect with each other. And we have an obligation as executive members and senior leadership team to really seek to understand people's feedback about what's happening in the business. And I always sort of say to people, there's enough room at the table. And I'm not suggesting that everybody sits around a board meeting, but we should make sure that everybody's contribution is heard and understood around those tables. And that's the obligation for us as strong leaders. And then I think lastly is that piece around leading with authenticity and integrity. That piece around us being able to scan constantly for the threat is a deep part of who we are as humans. It goes back to caveman days. And we fundamentally know in ourselves, we can feel it when someone is not being authentic, when they're not leading with integrity, when they're focusing on themselves. And that doesn't create an environment of strong trust. And I think once you are able to have all those things and make a beautiful cake from it, it's an amazing thing that happens when you can lead people through really challenging times and also really abundant times as well.
And one thing, so one thing you said before, Ria, I absolutely love that, and I know Soph will jump in with how much of that resonated. But before we pressed record as well, you talked about intuitive leadership as well, and I honestly, that resonates so much. I feel like from my own experience, I have a business degree, but I set up Lotus People when I was 27, and obviously work in a very people-focused industry, and so much of my leadership and my success and my sort of style is intuitive. It's sort of reading, and I actually find it hard sometimes if I'm managing someone who is speaking about someone who might be 2 steps away. I almost lose sort of the intuition of sitting in front of someone and being able to read and respond to how to sort of guide them or what to coach them on. If I'm too many steps away, I actually can lose that intuition. And so I just wanted to pull it up again because there was so many good points that you had there. And when we spoke before, one thing that really stuck with me is just that intuitive leadership. Can I add a very quick add on to that? So sorry, I know I'm jumping. But as you manage huge teams, I know you are the type who would of course be I guess self-aware and be led by sort of your gut as well as data and commercials and everything else. But have you dealt with that issue of sort of losing the proximity or intuition on when you are a few too many steps away from someone?
Yes, and I think that happens at certain points in business, right? You know, if there's a significant M&A happening, if you are under significant pressure through needing to change approach through a business product line or whatever it might be, there is a moment when you can become insular. You can start looking inwardly, and our role as leaders is to make sure that as much as we're looking inwardly at ourselves, it needs to be reflective, but then being able to understand outwardly what's happening in the business. And there's lots of data sets and data and information that you can pull to be able to get sentiment analysis and all of those wonderful things. But ultimately, and I've said this often, there are people in our business that will always have a much stronger finger on the pulse than anybody else. And I always say a team leader, so a frontline leader who is invariably leading 12 or 15 people, will have a very strong view quite quickly of how their team is going. And as long as they've got really strong skills and their site manager or whoever it might be has got similar skills and is really helping getting to the point of understanding the feeling of our people and our team, and helping people understand how they can connect to something else and how they can be part of something bigger than they are as an individual. Intuition is absolutely critical. If you sit in an office all day and do not leave it and do not walk the floor and spend time in your business, you will lose it almost inevitably, because there's nothing more than someone wanting to understand for whom they work for and what that person stands for. And I can write a million newsletters, but unless I stand in front of someone and look at the whites of their eyes, it is very, very difficult to build that connection. And in an environment where, if I think back just a couple of years ago, we talked about Great Resignation, we talked about frantically trying to recruit people. That was often the point of difference, right? It was the difference between, do I know and see and feel and hear the person that I'm going to work with and for, or are they just a person that sits in their office all day and doesn't see me as an individual? So I think that's the point of difference. Using intuition wisely, but also having a high emotional intelligence is something I look for in all of my leaders, to be able to facilitate those types of conversations and interactions with our teams and our people all the time.
Yeah, I love that. I think like taking it back as well, there was a couple of things that you were talking about around like growth. And I think John C. Maxwell, one of the quotes that he always said and really stuck with me was, you don't go through hard things, you grow through hard things. But I also think the only way you can look at that is if you are in an environment where you are feeling psychosocial safety, and that does come from the leaders at the top. And I think there's obviously the buzzword around it at the moment is definitely been spoken about much more widely on places like LinkedIn and socials over the last kind of 12-18 months. But I do think, there's definitely more of an emphasis going into that. And I think, again, and knowing one of your kind of areas, which is connecting people to purpose, I think really bringing people on that journey. Like, I know we've had conversations about that, and I think there are a lot of companies that aren't doing that well at the moment. I think definitely through conversations that I have specifically within the HR market, maybe some of the challenges that they're finding as an organisation, a lot of organisations are really talking about how can we engage our workforces. It feels like during COVID, obviously we've spoken about this, Ria, in depth, that a lot of people had that epiphany moment during COVID. They realised that work wasn't the be all and end all of everything of their life. There's other priorities. They might have children. They might want work-life balance. Like, there's so many bits that do go into our life and what makes us happy. But if you were thinking about them types of organisations and thinking about how people can really start connecting people to the purpose of the organisation, like, where do you start with something like that?
I mentioned at the start, I've got a 10-year-old, right? And I think back to my own childhood to a degree, and I think about, you know, being in school and being told to do something, and, you know, invariably you didn't ask why, you just did. You know, that was the generation that you know, we came from, and that's what we did. I now have a 10-year-old who uses why in almost every other sentence, because she's genuinely trying to seek to understand and you know, navigate the world in which she lives in. And it is about connecting to the why. And I think when we talk to people in business and we say, this is what we're going to do, if someone doesn't ask me why, I haven't done my job properly. I really want people to question me and my thinking and my decision making. And, you know, when I'm building a strategy and I've taken everybody's feedback on board, I really want someone to say, well, why are we doing this? What happens then is that's when innovation happens. Innovation doesn't come from me. Innovation doesn't come from somebody necessarily sitting around a C-suite table. It can, and it does, of course, but invariably it comes from our colleagues who are doing these processes every day, who are feeling the pain of an organisation every day, and if they understand the why, which is invariably about customer, it's invariably about doing something good, it's invariably about service or sales or whatever it might be. If you can help those colleagues generate opportunities for the removal of some of those really scratchy processes, or opportunities to really sit back and go, well, why do I click that button 3 times? Or why don't I use AI to be able to automate some of these really manual tasks that I do every day? And that will allow me to focus on some of the more complex opportunities to deal with customers, and we can speak to more customers instead. So it is, to a degree, thinking about how we focus ourselves in a way that talks about how would our children ask us these questions? And if they came into our workplace, would they say to us, I think those letters probably could be answered in a slightly different way, or, oh, you're still using a fax machine, that's really interesting. You know, and actually putting a different lens on everything and asking people to really challenge the why in almost everything that we do. And if you are a really secure leader, that's okay, you know, and if that brings up an insecurity, that's okay too, because that's growth. Yeah. And to your point, you know, around your quote around, you know, you don't grow through it, you know, you grow through it. It's absolutely right, because it pulls up the mirror for you to say, why is this uncomfortable for me? Yeah. What is it about this question that doesn't make me feel comfortable about being able to respond? Do I not know enough? Do I not feel enough? Do I not think I've thought about it? And all of those things are really powerful for everyone to grow together. And I think that's the joy and the why.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think even as you're talking there, like, why do people worry about kind of being, it's almost that fear of failure. I think that comes into it a lot as well. And I think we've been told for so many years that failure is not a great thing, and you don't want to fail and you want to succeed. And I think perception of that is definitely changing. I think as more and more leaders kind of talk about the fact that we want people to be experimenting, and we want to encourage people to do these things. And I even gave this example yesterday, but within Amazon, like, they have failed more times than they've succeeded, but they're still an extremely successful organization. And every time they make these experiments, like, there's a couple that go on to succeed incredibly, but their kind of whole culture is created on, let's experiment, let's see what works and things like that. But one other thing you were talking about with I suppose just in general around the kind of connecting people to the purpose, I always take that to the Simon Sinek quote, which is, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And again, I've even had to think about that in my time of, like, I've been in recruitment for 12 years now, and it's a long time. And I think you do get to them moments in your career where you go, why am I doing what I'm doing? And I think even for me during COVID, I took that step back to go, like, why do I do what I do? And it was really reflecting and going, do you know, I actually love talking to people, and I love that we can really add value. And whilst we're helping people get a job, these jobs also play a huge factor in their general everyday life. Like, it plays factors on their personal life. Can they have more flexibility? Can they see their kids more? And I think when you start buying into that why, and you bring people on the journey to come through that, that's where I think that engagement really goes up. So yeah, I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one thing I'd add to that, Soph, is that it isn't stuck. Like, I've run Lotus for 9 years, and I have had to revisit that. And as a business, we've had to revisit that. And I don't think it should be just a set and forget, because inevitably so much changes. How I am now as a leader and as a person is worlds apart from 27-year-old me, who was just so excited to set up an agency and knew absolutely nothing about anything other than recruitment. And so revisiting that and continuing to sort of I guess intentionally focus on those things and make sure that they are being passed down is obviously, yeah, super important.
And if I can add, just very briefly, you know, we've all talked about Stephen Bartlett, you know, and had the opportunity to see him live, and he talks about the 1%. And actually, you know, if I think about my own employee experience through my career, it's not actually been the big bang technology changes. It's not been the short term you know, feel good pieces that I've thought, you know what, yeah, I can't wait to go to work tomorrow. It's the 1% stuff. It's the small incremental changes that you can look back and almost like swimming out to seeing, and wow, look how far we are from shore now, because we just put one stroke in front of the other, in front of the other, in front of the other, and we're swimming. And it is just a constant compacting of small things that are generated by many that make the difference in my experience, certainly, and certainly in global business and large scale business. They're the things that make the really big difference.
Yeah, for sure. I think that we've obviously covered a lot in the world of work is constantly evolving. I think one question that we have would be really useful for kind of leaders of tomorrow, really, but what skills do you think a leader of tomorrow would need to have? Or even, I guess, look at it from a different context, what do leaders of today need to be doing to prepare and create leaders of tomorrow?
I think back to my own kind of career pathway. when I've failed, it's been in times where I've gone from being a technical leader into a people leadership role, and I haven't bolstered my skills, and I haven't understood the difference between busy work and leadership work. And I think that's for leaders today, it's really, really critical to understand the different layers of work. And so, you know, sitting in a frontline leadership role, I firmly believe that 60 to 70% of your time needs to be with your people. And that feels like a lot, right? Because in the background, you've got the sort of voice in your head that says, but I've got all these emails, and I've got all this code, you know, I've got all these other things to do. But the reality is it's busy work, right? So we need to get really focused on what leadership work actually is. And I say that almost at every level of the business. I've worked in many organisations where we've said, we're going to have no meeting Fridays, and we're only going to check our emails at 9, 12 and 3. And, you know, people are hyperventilating, you know, like, my God, I can't possibly cope. Well, you can, but also we have to create boundaries, and boundaries are hard in business, right? So you have to be able to create the space to understand what leadership work actually is. When I think about kind of where we're going in the future, and I know we talked on it briefly, and although I'm joking about, you know, you still use a fax machine, and we used to think about AI and all that sort of stuff, but we got to start to be really adaptable. We now have 5 generations of colleagues in the workforce, which we haven't seen for, you know, almost 100 years. We have a massively challenging economy, and those 5 generations of colleagues need something different from their leaders than we did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. So there's an adaptability of leaders now that we maybe haven't seen before. We're now also further challenged with not being able to so much swing our chair around anymore and see our people. So there's an ability for leaders, or there's an opportunity for leaders to be able to learn that skill of people being remote and people being in the office, and what skills do they need in order to make sure they're generating you know, feedback from the team and a really good team culture. Tech change is probably, and really should have been, the one I mentioned most. If you're not in front of that, you're immediately behind it. If you're not talking about tech, if you're not thinking about tech, if you're not thinking about your tech stack, if you're not thinking about where are the things in my business that cause friction points for my customers, for my colleagues, for our teams, for our supply chain, then you're already well behind the curve. So you've got to start to think about that. And you know what? Get really nosy about what other organisations are doing, because that's where you'll learn. Right? There's no new ideas. It's just they're just slightly branded different. That's all. Strong emotional intelligence. You know, that piece around intuition comes up very strongly for me. But you know, really understanding what drives you and your team and your business is absolutely critical. Know your numbers inside out and back to front. I used to work for a guy years ago, and he would just catch me sort of walking down the corridor and say, what are the numbers today? And if I didn't know them, A, I'd feel really silly, but B, he knew them before I did. And that might not necessarily be the right benchmark, but understanding how your business is working. How do we make money? Are we profitable? Are we going to lose money? What does this quarter look like? What does the next quarter look like? What does the next 3 years look like in line with our strategy? All of those things are really important. And that's at any level of leader in the business. But I think if you can embed those skills even at frontline leaders, they will be incredibly successful. And the other thing is, especially for a big business, is understanding how to collaborate cross-functionally. We're really good at sitting in our own backyard, and we're even better at sitting back and pointing the finger and sitting in the kind of mud bath and sort of bathing ourselves in it and going, look, you know, they're not very good. But actually you might have a skill or capability or experience that would elevate them, because ultimately we're just all on a continuum of performance. And so if you can really get in and understand, and that's just about curiosity. It's about curiosity and being brave. And there's a great film called We Bought a Zoo, and the father says to the daughter, it's just 5 seconds of brave. And that's all it ever is just to start a conversation with someone you don't know in your own backyard, to understand what they do and what you do and how you can help each other.
It actually reminds me of a conversation I had with my partner this week. This shows you how much I know about what he does for a living. He has a PhD in urban planning, and he works for the New South Wales state government within planning, and ask me any more questions and I absolutely will not be able to answer them, but that's as far as I know. But exactly to that point, they're a massive, massive organization, and he has his sort of huddle and his sort of relatively small team that he works in, and he is driven by a good culture and wanting to sort of have that team connection, which when they have such good flexibility around working from home can be hard. And so he's pushing himself out of his comfort zone and going and speaking to people in other teams and getting out of his own backyard. And for him, it's like, it is a stretch because it's a massive organization. There's no relevance for him to be going over and approaching these individuals, and they're probably a bit like, what's this bloke up to? But they've been all positive interactions, and only good has come from them. And so I think you're right. I think we can very easily get siloed, and that is obviously something that is definitely worth focusing on, particularly in a world where the human connection piece within work is becoming more minimized and becoming, I guess, less and less because of how much we're benefiting from flexible and remote working. And I suppose in thinking about everything that you just said, like there's so much focus on, we're talking about the future, we're talking about the leaders of tomorrow, we're talking about, I guess, forward thinking and future thinking. If we reflect back on your own journey, what in particular would come to mind when you think about maybe the hardest lesson that you've had to learn as a leader?
Just one.
Top 5, let's go for it.
I think when I started out my career, and it's funny actually, because my dad always used to say, show people yourself and lead with vulnerability. And I came from a generation, still come from a generation where vulnerability was a bit of a weakness, right? I don't know everything. I don't want to ask for help. People are going to think, I can't do the job if I'm asking someone more experienced than me. So I think the piece around vulnerability is absolutely critical, and being open to embracing the parts of yourself that you naturally push away. If there's shame of something that hasn't gone well before, or fear of not doing something well in the future, worrying about things, almost unnecessarily. There's lots of quotes that talk about you can't worry about things that haven't happened in the future, but we do, right? We're humans. That's what we want to do. And I think the other piece is about ego, right? The minute you start to sit inside yourself and start worrying about, what do people think of me? Did I say that right? Are they going to think that I'm stupid, or whatever it might be? You're only in a race to the bottom. And that's the point when you need to start to be asking to build a tribe of people around you. And they're normally 3 or 4 key people that will be able to really help you along the way. And don't go to the person that is going to give you the answer that you want. We've all got friends like that, where we ring them and say, oh, such and such did this, and they go, oh, that's terrible, I can't believe. Yeah, you're so right. Don't find that person. You can find lots of those. Find the person that is almost has a different attitude to work than you, has a different personality type to you, and go and ask them for feedback, and help you to understand how, in the environment that you both know, how am I going? What's kind of happening? So almost having someone that doesn't have an unconscious bias to you, because we can all waddle down the corridors and try and find someone that will give us the answer that we're looking for, but it's someone that we don't. Family, really important. So during COVID, I'm ashamed to say, but my 2 words to my 10-year-old or 7-year-old at the time were hang on. Because I felt like because I was at home, I needed to work more to be able to make sure that we were all demonstrating performance, right? I was reading all the stats that said we're dropping performance by 20% across workplaces, and I didn't want my team and I to be in that group. So it was absolutely kind of hang on. But when you're in an environment where it's particularly stressful, you're going through a big program of work, or there's lots of programs happening, get their feedback on what's happening for you. How am I going? Are you seeing anything different? And they're often the most brutal discussions, because they can give you the feedback that you really don't want to hear. And then lastly is getting a coach or a mentor. I mean, obviously they're 2 very different things, but helping them put that mirror back up to you so you can see the blind spots, as Maxwell would say, you know, and you can see the areas of yourself that are a bit uncomfortable. And with that, lead with the vulnerability on the back end of that to say, I've identified this thing in myself. Can catch me when you see me doing it, or being able to identify opportunities for you to grow in that space. Because we know when we're strong, we all sit in our strengths naturally. It's when we sit in the areas of discomfort that we do that growth. And I think they're probably my biggest lessons over the years, and still super uncomfortable sometimes. But I'm more comfortable, and I can work through that faster now as I've gotten older. But because I have good people around me that I trust, and I've built, you know, that trust and rapport with, and they can say to me, not good, Ria, not cool. And I'll go, all right, cool, no problem, thanks very much.
Yeah,
I love that. I think the vulnerability piece, like even for me, like massively resonates. I think growing up, you look at it from a couple of different lenses, but you can kind of see it as you don't want to tell people things because they might think a particular way of you. It's just like almost that uncertainty, that risk, that emotional exposure. I was listening to Brené Brown last night on her book Dare to Lead, and she used this concept around like love and relationships, and she was like, if you're in a relationship, like you're already being vulnerable. Like you can't make somebody love you back. They could leave at any time, but you don't go through life thinking, are they going to leave? Are they going to feel differently tomorrow morning when they wake up? Like you're already living in vulnerability most of the time. I think the difference is when you put it on a work kind of concept, it makes us feel different because we see it as that weakness. And I think that's been a huge change even for me to go, it's okay to let your guard down sometimes. Like that's how you grow. And again, John Maxwell, with that kind of don't go through things, you grow through things. And I think it is one of them things. But yeah, massively resonates. I think, and even again, you were talking about your daughter. What did you say? You said something about your daughter.
She says, when I said to her, hang on.
Yeah, massively resonates. I do the same, and I've been really conscious of it, and it's made me even think, what am I instilling in them? Because like I think leadership and parenting, I mean, they're so aligned. We're effectively leading our children, and it is a funny dynamic because you're very much aware, especially in this day and age, you're aware of everything you do is creating them to be the person that they're going to be. And obviously trauma is being spoken about more and more nowadays, is what parents are doing. And I also then look at that from the lens of, okay, well, if that's what we're doing to our children, like actually what are leaders doing to their people? And I think having that real consciousness of every interaction that you're having with people is doing something to them internally. And I think raising that self-awareness and that consciousness is huge, player in terms of how you progress forward in that space.
You know, it's really interesting talking about the children piece, right? Because I, you know, I'm very fortunate. I, you know, have a child who's very in tune with her sort of emotional state and well-being, and you know, all of those things. And I had to take some really hard lessons out of COVID because, you know, my office was we thought it was going to be 3 weeks, right? You know, my office was sitting at the dining room table with my laptop on a stack of books from my office, and then subsequently made the spare room into an office. And for her, I was conscious that I was teaching her something that was actually about a lack of boundaries. And, you know, everything sort of started to blur in, but I was the orchestrator of that. No one was telling me to work excessive hours and because it was about perception, right? So I was leaning into my insecurities of, what if the perception of me is that I'm not working as hard because I'm not walking into the office in my suit every day and, you know, working 8 till 6 or whatever it might be. So I think that piece also is as much about vulnerability as it is about talking about the boundaries that you put around yourself, the things that allow you to have disconnect from business, because we all need that. We'll go to bed and we'll be thinking about things. But I know for me at home, when the laptop's closed, the laptop's done. And you know, now my daughter knows that, but it was a really hard lesson to go through. And you know, you'll see it now on emails where people will say, I choose to send this email at more unsociable hours, but please don't feel like you need to. And some days I'll read it and go, I need to respond. And other days I go, you know what, actually, you don't. It's okay. You know, my best working hours are like 7 p.m. to 1 a.m. You know, they're the best times for me to work. That's just a personal preference. Other people are getting up 4 hours later and they're their best times.
Yeah.
And it's just about sharing that stuff, right? This is what works best for me. It's what works best for you. How do we work together in the middle?
Yeah, it's something I've really struggled with. Me and Ria have spoken about this, about me taking time off.
Yes.
Like the laughing joke of my life at the moment. But it's one of them things that I, even like you're saying with kids, like, yes, your kids are looking at you and you're setting that tone and you're setting the example when they're looking at what you're doing. But I even think of it from a team perspective. Like I always say to people in my team, like, don't see me logging on at 9 o'clock at night means that you need to do that. And if I take my laptop on holiday, it doesn't also mean you need to do that. But there is that part of me that's really struggled with that, because I think whilst I'm saying don't do that, they're watching me do it.
Absolutely.
So I think it's, again, like something that I'm very much learning through at the moment is going, actually, you need to set the tone as the leader. Like, whilst you can say I'm doing all these things, all they're doing is looking up to you thinking, God, when I'm a leader or when I'm in that role, they're the types of things I need to be doing. And that's very much where mine's come from. Like I look at the reasons that I do maybe some of the things, and same as you, like working long hours and things. Like I think I've always put down, the more I work, the more successful I'll be. And that's been a self-limiting belief perhaps, but I've equally seen my mum do the same. Like she's worked very hard, she works long hours. So I've kind of gone, okay, to be successful, maybe that's what I need to do. And I think it's, again, becoming aware and going through like the self-development journey with personal development. That's when you start really understanding yourself. And I think that even ties into maybe conversations around like self-development and like, I guess the need for that within leadership. Like how important do you think it is that people are focusing on kind of personal development as a leader?
I think it's more critical now than it ever has been. I mentioned earlier on, when I think about my own journey and where I've probably fallen down is where there's been a high degree of ego, in my sort of early years of going from being a frontline colleague and going into a leadership role and thinking, well, I just have to do kind of more leadership type stuff, but still have the technical stuff happening as well. Yeah. So that jump between those two roles is probably one of the most important times for professional development, for sure. And it's, like I said, kind of creating that space to understand what leadership work actually is at each level of the organisation is critical. And it doesn't have to be super formal learning. I mean, we don't have to enroll into long, protracted courses. Whilst they're incredibly useful, invariably people want something that they can have in a really kind of modularized way that's easily digestible. And more often than not, many of us learn through doing. So, we want to go and take something, grab it, understand it with the theory, and then take it back into our workplace and just play with it for a little while and see how it feels. And then if you've built a culture within your team that generates feedback, talk to that. I was leading teams in another country whereby we were very open about talking about our leadership program that we developed and subsequently then rolled out across thousands of people. And then we actually put in systems and processes for people to be able to then provide feedback on their leader. Now, that was what the leaders signed up to, right? But it was your leaders learning a bit more about coaching. We'd love to get your experience on your interaction with your leader recently, and have you seen a change? And on the back of that, people were shifting in almost real time their capabilities. Choosing a really good mentor is critical. You got to make sure you're not getting a mentor that's just going to tell you what they did. That's not useful. But creating space for you to talk about your environment, what's happening for you, and where the challenges and opportunities are, and helping them bounce. If you're fortunate enough to have an executive coach, that runs over, say, a 12-month period, that's hugely valuable as well. But more often than not, there are organizations that partner or are part of a big group of companies that you can go and spend time with and that allows you to see leadership in a different context. And it may be in a manufacturing environment where you've come from an office environment, for example. So you can see the different styles of leadership. And really making sure that you're developing those skills ongoing. It's not one and done ever. And And often if you can take those learnings and use them as sort of really useful tools to be able to say, this is probably what I don't want to do. You know, when you've messed something up or done something that you'd like to do differently, taking those almost as really practical examples and saying, can I use this as an opportunity for growth? Yeah, I absolutely can. And leveraging people around you to do it.
Mm-hmm. And it is, I completely agree with you. And I think that learning and development piece and that ability to sort of grow people within an organization to then allow them to grow the generation underneath them, it is so important. And yet I do think it probably, we get data from Seek and from various different sort of Gallup surveys and things like that, and it is always one of the biggest areas that employees are still looking for. And yet every conversation we have with leaders, they know that it is a core focus and a core area that will enable future sustainable growth, and obviously that people investment. From your perspective, what do you think that businesses can be doing better when it comes to whether it's people initiatives or employee engagement in general?
Such a hot topic, right? You know, and I really want to find
too.
I want to find the company that's nailed this, and I would like to. I'll go and do anything there. You know, I really do. But you're right. The conversation about career and pathways, maybe it's always going to be here, because what that probably tells me is people want to not only learn here, but they want to thrive here, and I think that tells us something about people wanting to be in an organisation. But I think. You know, thinking about employee experience, we always talk about keeping top talent engaged and inspired, but you know, it's actually doing that across all of the business. We get very focused on the top 10%, and so I think firstly it's about understanding where is everybody at. You know, where are we actually at? So it's I've seen organisations and have been in organisations where we've kind of gone big bang and said, this is what we're going to do. And then someone said, well, what's the data that tells us where we're at? And they've gone, oh, yeah, probably haven't thought about that as well as we could have done. So it's the really critical touch points in the journey, right, along the way. So from the moment you start, the moment we put an ad out into the market, what are the expectations that we're setting? What are the impressions that we're making along the way? What's the onboarding process look like? I mean, you know, probably this maybe happened to all of us, whereby you've accepted a role and you might have a 4, 6, 12-week notice period, and there's crickets during that 12 weeks. And you think, it's such a wonderful process with the interviewer and I can't wait to start the organisation, but now I'm a bit nervous because I'm going to give up this comfort and safety of my existing role, but I don't even know where I've got to go on day one at 9 a.m. So it's that whole piece around, what does the onboarding process look like? How do we welcome people into our business? How do we integrate them into the team? I call it the incubation period for anybody at any level in the business, but how do we incubate someone? I call them like little chicks. When we think about training, this is probably the piece that just drives me insane. Having been in operations for such a long time, we throw everybody into the same training. We throw them all of the same online learning immediately. We've got no consideration about making that individualized for them to have an experience that makes them say, Ria Leason's here and someone's thought about me as an individual as opposed to, you know, a number. Those first 12 months are critical. You know, we're seeing it in the market more now than ever, where people are really questioning, not only is my rem and ben, you know, appropriate, and have I got good training opportunities, but what are my leaders like, and is this somewhere I can grow and thrive? So ongoing really good performance conversations along the way are really critical. And to mention rem and ben again, you know, let's make sure it's the right rem and ben for the person in the role. Yeah. And tell people if you can't, if it's not going to be different, if you can't adjust it, if you're in a band, be upfront about that really early. Strong employer branding, you know, a good EVP in market's critical. You know, advertising 4 weeks off a year for annual leave ain't an EVP, in my opinion. And I still see it.
Minimal.
Legal requirement.
It makes my heart break every time I see an advert that says it. But you get really clear about who you are and really clear about what you're offering, and you will attract the quality candidates that you want when those two things collide. Those positive experiences through that process, so through the recruitment process, onboarding, training, they're your ambassadors, right? I can sit in front of people, and it's like I said, I can write 1 million newsletters, or I can do 1 million podcasts, but ultimately it's the people that you sit next to that will be the ambassador for your business. So look after them, not just a short-term commodity. Clear goals. Who are we as a business? Where are we going? How do you individually contribute? How does your team contribute? Is that something you want to get on board with? So everyone's really clear about where we're going. That's super upfront. And then, needless to say, the growth and development piece, right? Like, people are now coming in, and we saw it during COVID. People were coming into roles, and they were wanting to move roles to be a more senior or different technical role 12, 18 months earlier than we would have ever shifted them before. And what we were seeing, and you would have seen it far more than I, I'm sure, but colleagues were moving organizations, not necessarily just for a few $1,000s more, but to have a more senior job title when they may or may not have been ready. Yeah. But we need to be in front of that. We need to be building toolkits and passports for people so that they can kind of validate their skills throughout the business, but then they can sort of have the opportunity, especially in large organizations where you're not known necessarily individually, to be able to demonstrate those skills. And that's a combination of technical learning and true sort of OD type learning opportunities in there as well. And then the last thing is the offboarding, and I think it's always the piece that people forget. I've seen this hundreds, if not thousands of times, is you will never have a more honest colleague than the moment they have chosen to exit the business. And that is the point that you gather feedback in a really open-minded way. And yes, you need to apply logical thinking to the circumstances of which they're exiting, but being able to be respectful, help them transition with that respect is critical, because you still want them to walk away from the business with a feeling that they were heard and understood and worked hard and contributed, because at whatever level someone did. Yeah. And that they are absolutely critical. And of course, tech can absolutely help this, as well as really good people leadership capability. If you can mesh those two things together, that's when magic happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No quick solutions there to all of it. It's a big spectrum.
I think you're you have very much like a bird's eye view. I think that's one thing you're very good at, is you look at so many different facets of the business. I think a couple of things you touched on, and really relevant for, I guess, us being in the recruitment industry, that first 12 months, like, we are seeing huge incline in the volume of applications of people who haven't been in roles long. Like tenure, that's reduced significantly. I remember when I first started in recruitment, everyone was in roles for like 4 or 5 years, whereas now we're seeing so many resumes where people have been in a job for 12 months and they're looking to move on already. And whenever I press that for why are you looking to move on, it's typically unhappy with the leadership style, or it's maybe the culture, or it is lack of growth opportunities. And it's not really much else. Like during COVID, I definitely think there was obviously that shift where people were getting 20k pay rises, and it was like, it's too good to turn down, like, we're gonna go with it. But I do think that things like that obviously are making a huge difference. The other thing you talked about again was around like people being promoted maybe before they're ready, and again even ties into some of the conversations that I've been having with HR directors who've talked about maybe an uplift in the volume of employee relations cases. How often are ER teams getting these increases and fluxes of volume of performance management or sickness? And actually, when you really go into the detail, a lot of it's because their managers haven't actually been kind of trained to look after teams. And even things like they've kind of gone from being a technical person, being great at that, and they've gone, right, you're ready to be a manager, off you go. So we're definitely even seeing that side of it, I think, on the increase. And then again, exit interviews, something me and Sinead spoke about a little bit recently, and I'm sure you, Sinead, you won't mind sharing, but I love an exit interview. I love a survey. I love the feedback that it provides. I think it can feel really personal sometimes, depending on what that feedback is. But I think it's a really good opportunity to just take a step back, read in, get a bit of clarity, and actually come up with some solutions around some of that feedback that's maybe been provided, specifically if it's negative feedback. Like, it's always lovely to hear that I had a great experience and things like that. But I think, again, the only way businesses grow and get better is through those types of feedback. So I think that's one thing that I've really started taking on board over the last few months.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, you mentioned performance feedback, performance management. I actually don't see performance management as a bad thing. And I've been in businesses where we sort of gone in and set up a team, and then out of the woodwork there's lots of older performance management because they have a change of HR business partner, or we're now showing them some tools and opportunities to understand what good looks like. And then as we would expect, going back into their business and saying, that's not necessarily where I want my team to be. And I do actually need to think about performance managing Sarah and Susie, and how do I move the dial there? And it's not necessarily moving someone out of the business. I think often we get very caught up in performance management is going to result in someone exiting the business. Actually, it's more often than not a realignment of expectations. And if someone can then maintain those expectations, what you actually end up doing is lifting the whole team. And that's that you literally taking them from that good point to the great point. And that's ultimately leadership. Setting the tone, setting the expectations, and holding people to account. I expect that from my leader, and ultimately, I would hope that everyone expects that in going into work every day.
Yeah, I love that perspective. Look, from my side, I think you have so much knowledge, and I could press on this all day. One question I have got, and I think, look, you talk a lot about challenges that kind of leaders have and everything like that. But I guess what's one of the hardest lessons that you've maybe had to learn as a people leader?
You can't do everything. And as someone who I want to be a high achiever, I want to make sure my team is achieving a lot. The more senior you become, it can get quite lonely, and the opportunity to sort of bounce, ideas and things start to reduce for the amount of people that you can engage with. So I think you have to get really, really smart at understanding a team. How do you delegate stuff to them? Trust in the fact that they will deliver. And also that no one is a mind reader. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway for me, is because I'm naturally running quite quickly in my brain, there's an immediate thought that everybody is up alongside you, A, at the same pace, and B, knows exactly where we're going and where we're going to land. So you've got to slow down to speed up sometimes. You've got to slow down, delegate, help people understand how to get there alongside you, and then trust in the fact that they will then get to the destination. It's a little bit like playing that game where you say, sort of start Chinese whispers, and you say this is the word, and then by the time it comes all the way back around the room, it's a completely different word. And sometimes that's what leadership feels like. And you can either sit in that frustration and get irritated with the person, or you can sit and look critically at yourself and go, if I'd have slowed down, if I'd have helped them understand, if I'd have been clear about my expectations and delegated fully and not tried to, be in control of the situation or whatever it might be, we would have had a different outcome. And I think that's probably been the biggest learning for me over the years. But equally, if you're fortunate enough to build your own team, you're starting to generate trust early. They've got good integrity, they've got good intention. And even if it doesn't quite end up as the right word at the end of it, it's okay, because you've also got the adaptability and flexibility too. So I think that's probably one of my biggest takeaways. I think the other one is one I touched on earlier on, which is about boundaries. I know that I will miss out on time with my daughter. I will miss out on time of things that I love, of study and professional development, all of those things. If I don't put time around myself and my day, I know that if I hit 10 hours, I'm not very useful to anybody. So at some point you have to say, I can either keep chugging and trying to get through this, or I can close it down tomorrow and wait until I come back tomorrow morning and come back fresh. And I don't know if you've ever written an email at 1 o'clock in the morning and come back to it and thought, what was I drinking when I was writing that? Thank God I didn't send that.
That's a Sophie trait. I'd be more of a 5 in the morning gal.
I know. I feel like me and Ria could definitely be connecting.
We could live with each other, no problem. No worries.
By 9 and up, brain starts activating at about 4:35, and that's when you're going to.
Honestly, I find myself really creative at night. Like, I even find that when I'm in bed, I end up kind of switching the light on and turning my notes on my phone. I just find that I get these ideas when I'm going to bed, and I really struggle to go to sleep. So I enjoy working in the night, whereas I am the opposite in the mornings. I don't know.
No, me too. Well, I'm definitely not a morning person. But I think over the years I've become better at being I would have called it selfish years ago, but now it's just about making sure that I sleep well, I eat well, I exercise properly. I move my body when I'm feeling a bit of stagnation in it. That I regularly connect with people. If I've been at home for a few days, I know I've got to get up and I've got to be in the office, because I need to physically connect with colleagues and look at them in the whites of the eyes. And it's not one size fits all, I don't think. But getting it goes right back to that vulnerability, about being honest, about really authentically leading a team, when there's no way, the more senior you get, you can manage everything. It's not possible. So having a crack hot team around you and leveraging their skills, which is exactly why you employed them, because if not, why would you have them there? For you to sit and carry everything on your shoulders? Absolutely not. Leverage them and use them. That's what they ultimately want to be there for.
And I love so much what you mentioned about setting clear expectations within when you're delegating. It reminds me of something that I always think about, that Brené Brown spoke about on her podcast, when sort of sitting around, and she's probably she describes herself as having a similar brain, fast pace, wants to achieve a lot, not a very good sense of time, in that she can achieve a lot more in a short amount of time, which I think we can all very much relate to. But when she's sitting down with her team and looking at all these projects and delegating, she has the team sort of say, what does done look like to you?
Yes, great question.
I absolutely love that. I think we can send people away with things and not communicate clearly, and then get a version back and go, well, that's not what I meant. But that's, as you say, on us. Honestly, I feel like we could talk about this, and then more holistically the entire sort of spectrum of humans and people and everything. We could keep on going with it. But I suppose to leave it, Ria, would you be able to share with us maybe a recommendation, whether it's a book, a podcast? We've had quite a few references to those today, but if there's anything in particular that you've lent on and have enjoyed that you think our audience should go and look up, what would it be?
Great question. I have two quite big dogs, and I have to exercise them very regularly, and Molly is my bull mastiff, and Molly and I walk probably a couple of hours every day, and so it gives me the opportunity to at least listen to an audiobook or a good couple of podcasts at least. So I'm a big podcast fan, but I might stay in the Brené Brown arena, and if you pardon the pun, her Dare to Lead book almost transformed the way I think about work. Thinking about vulnerability and framing it as a strength instead of a weakness, and that sort of fostering of authenticity and courage. More now than ever, we need bravery in our workplaces, because we've got such different diversity, because we've got so many different colleagues in the business, because we're in such a challenging economic climate. We desperately need those pieces. Being grateful, something I love that she talks to, sitting with gratitude is something I try very hard to do every day. It might be a small moment of gratitude, but do it regularly. And then, creating an environment where people feel seen. We all want that as humans. It sits you know, not too far on Maslow's basic hierarchy of needs. You know, we know that. So feel seen, feel heard, and do you value me? You know, if you can lead with those things in mind, just phenomenal. And then lastly, I think the piece out of her book that always resonates with me as someone who likes to push herself hard is compassion for self. It's okay that it's not today, and it's even okay if it's not tomorrow. And sometimes you just have to be a little bit kinder to yourself. And, you know, with that and some good boundaries becomes, you know, you end up sitting in a space where you can lead with all of those great traits.
Kristen Neff is a woman who has a book called Self-Compassion, and I've seen it referenced in a lot of places and listened to some podcasts, and I think I'm about halfway through the audiobook, but it's exactly that. It's just the art of self-compassion, and I actually think we're all effing terrible at it. I don't think we're good at it, particularly in a world of professionalism and ambition and all the rest of it. And I know gratitude is obviously something that's very spoken about these days, but it honestly, the research shows that it actually changes the wiring in your brain.
It does.
I'd say for a year or so, my partner Ant and I, we literally every night before bed say 3 things that we're grateful for, and 1 thing that we did well. And it honestly, I can see how it's changed how I think about things. I'll have little moments of joy throughout the day and think, oh, I'm grateful for this, and that will be one of my gratefuls today. And it's a lovely way to rewire the neural pathways to sort of be thinking, seeing the positives. We all know how much more airtime the negative thoughts get, and so it's nice when you can sort of see those types of things come into effect. It's important and it's powerful.
And you know, if we go through life, I think, you know, Brene Brown says is, we go through life trying to find issues and problems and reasons that you are not good enough, you will find them. And so if we take the opportunity just to remind ourselves we are incredible at whatever we're doing at that moment in time, that I truly believe no one comes to work to do a bad job. No one's getting up in the morning to say, you know what, today I'm going to really try and screw this up. They're going to work to try their best, and it's our role as leaders to reframe the circumstances that they're in to be able to help them to be successful. And there are colleagues that may need to go and seek excellence elsewhere, as a ex-colleague of mine always used to say, but they should be the 1%ers. Because if we're creating a culture and a climate where people can do their best, and you don't look for the flaws and you look for the strengths, that's when that really is, I think, when greatness happens.
And I don't think there's a better note to leave it on, with that absolute pearl of wisdom. I know that Sophie and I started this series because it's something that our network and our community is asking for, but I absolutely am sure I can speak for both of us when I say that we are taking so much from it as well. I honestly have made so many notes. There's been so many nuggets of wisdom and so much advice that I honestly will take on. So thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all of the wealth of knowledge.
I feel like we're going to need to write like a newsletter from every episode, just kind of going, right, this is all the step-by-step process to follow to be a great leader. But honestly, thank you so much, Ria. Always a pleasure. I feel like your brain is just so unique, and I love that you kind of got this holistic approach as well. Like, you're interested in so many different ways of leadership, and I think that's where it's quite unique. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You.